Good evening everybody, welcome back to the Battle Bunker. So, I know in my last video I said that that would be the penultimate video before my first anniversary as a tournament player. However, myself and good friend Paul did manage to sneak in one last training game last weekend, or at the weekend. Paul decided he was going to play his Imperial Knights rather than his Tyranids, and because we're playing the East Anglian Grand Tournament RTT at this coming weekend, we decided that instead of using a regular UKTC map, we would use the first round map from the RTT now that the pack's been released. It was still Terraform, the same as round 1 for RTT is, but the map is different. The firing lines are very different on it. The whole layout very different to round 1 for the UKTC maps. So we set up, we rolled off, we shook hands, and Paul went first. Didn't want to, but to be honest, neither did I. So I was quite pleased he did. So he had 4 big knights and a smaller one. He had Canis Rex, he had a Lancer, he had and 2 other big ones. I can't remember what they were. One was massively anti-vehicle, and the other one was set up for anti-infantry. So, and he had 2 little knights as well. So Paul went first. He moved things out, managed to get on all 3 mid-board objectives. Terraform. For his primaries, turn 1, he drew behind enemy lines and sabotage. Now both of us, and it was pointed out to us afterwards by a friend of ours. Both of us forgot that behind enemy lines, turn 1 can be recycled. So Paul probably should have recycled that, but he managed to get sabotage for 3 points. And he put himself in a reasonably good position across the board for the Harlequins to do what I'd say for the Harlequins to do what they do best, but they don't kill knights very well. Or so I thought anyway. So that was his turn 1. Nice little 3 points to start. So I take my turn. I move forward. I've got an infiltrating unit that moves in to intercept Rex on one of the objectives. My Guardians come up through the middle. And for my primaries, I drew Assassination and Bring It Down. Bring It Down on its own against knights. Alright, there's a lot of wounds, but the smaller ones, not so many. Assassination, I had to kill one of the big knights. So I managed to take ownership of one of the mid-board objectives and terraformed it. So I removed his terraform and put one on for myself. And despite the fact that I threw Fire Prism, a Void Weaver, Shuriken Cannons, and 2 Haywire Bikes at one of the big knights, I couldn't do enough. I barely scratched it. I would pick the one knight that's got the 4+ invul in the whole army to try and do this against, and I managed to then tie it up in close combat, which I'll be honest, it didn't stay in close combat for long, as the 2 bikes that I'd sent into it were very swiftly removed. I did manage to bring down one of the smaller knights though, so scored 4 points on Bring It Down. So over we go, turn 2. Now the detachment that Paul's playing, one of the new detachments, the Valor Strike Lance, allows incredible movement on these knights. And in turn 2, he had one of his big knights, was one with the shield and the 4+ invul. He had this knight in my deployment zone in turn 2, all the way across the board, which was a little bit alarming. I had damaged it to a point where it was killable with the firepower that I'd got in the army. So he opened fire on one of my troop transports and brought it down. He'd drawn cleanse and extend battle lines. So he did manage to get it in, and he, like I say, he did manage to bring down one of the troops. And he was making a beeline. One of my troop transports, he was making a beeline for engaging one of my fire prisms in combat. However, when the troop transport died, all of the troops got out. There was no losses from the emergency disembark, so all of the troops got out, and I managed to get them in. He'd left me just enough room for me to get them in and screen off the fire prism, so that the only thing he could do was to charge the Harlequins, which he did in due course. But it then meant that the fire prism was safe because he didn't kill all the Harlequins. So he managed to score both cleanse and extend battle lines on that one, as he took back the objective that I'd taken and cleansed. So that was his turn 2. So my turn 2, I drew sabotage and storm hostile objective. Storm hostile objective was relatively easy. I just put more OC on one of the objectives where he had the knight than he'd already got on there. And then sabotage I did, the solitaire did, in a no man's land objective. Sorry, there's a noise behind me, rustling noise behind me. So this combat with this big knight and my Harlequins, I fell the Harlequins back, and I used the fallback and shoot stratagem, or fallback shoot, fallback charge stratagem, and I opened up on it with everything I'd got that was in range. 2 fire prisms, 2 void weavers, as many shuriken cannons as I'd got in range. The Death Jester had a pop as well. The Troop Master, and I managed to kill it. It's pretty much saving the rest of my army. So that was my turn. That was my turn 3. I scored sabotage and storm on that one. The game was really light-hearted, really fun game, and it seemed to go by so quickly. Had I done this video immediately after the game, I still wouldn't have been able to remember exactly what happened. It just rolled. Everything was going well. 4+ armor saves, when I needed them. 5+ armor saves when I needed them. 5+ invols when I needed them. I made so many. Somebody once said the art of playing Harlequins is to roll more 4+s in your opponents. I did. Yeah. So that was turn 2. Paul at this point has scored 16 points on his primary, compared to my 6. So he was starting to pull away with it. Turn 3, Paul drew overwhelming force and engage on all fronts. He scored overwhelming force for 5 points. but he couldn't get any more than 2/4 for engage. He just could not get there to do it. And again, just little bits of chip damage, I had some Harlequins in the middle of the board that killed a small knight, and thanks to the Troop Master's 6-inch consolidation, I managed to consolidate into his big knight that was in his big anti-tank knight that was in his deployment zone. Or well, it wasn't. No, tell a lie. It wasn't in his deployment zone. It was just outside in the building, just outside his deployment zone. So I managed to tie that up so it couldn't move. And those feisty little Harlequins, they chopped and chopped, and they held their own against him. They made their 4+ armor saves. So for my turn 3, so Paul scored another 18 points on his primary for turn 3. I only scored another 4. For turn 3, I scored both cleanse. I scored a small cleanse and an extend battle lines. So we did reasonably well there. And come this point, Paul is starting to run out of knights that can do stuff. So going into turn 4, this was a tough round for Paul. He lost Hector this turn. His secondaries was recover assets, and he scored 12 points on primary for this one. And I scored a 10 on primary for this one. So he did score recover assets, but he couldn't get to storm hostile objective. He just couldn't get to an objective that I was holding to be able to take it from me. And had he been able to get to one of them, he'd have easily taken it off of me. But like I say, he just couldn't get to a storm hostile objective. So he failed to score on that one. So like I say, it was not the best round. And then come my turn 3, that's when he lost Canis Rex, and he lost one of the other big knights as well in that turn. I managed to pull a display of might and engage on all fronts. Engage was relatively simple. At the end of his fight phase in turn 3, I'd lifted one of my Void Weavers. I'd used the exit the stage stratagem to lift a Void Weaver, which I then brought on in his deployment. Just outside his in his deployment zone. So turn 4. So that and a group of Harlequins that had charging up the board very easily got me all 4 quarters for it. So I scored maximum on engage and on display of might. And like I say, by this point he had one big knight left. 2 big knights left, sorry. So he had the one in his deployment zone. He had the one that had been roaming around, but just couldn't get to where he needed it to be. And then he had a navigator, I believe it was, in his deployment zone. So that was a really good round for me. There was a lot happened that round. So then we're into turn 5. Turn 5 again was another really bad round for Paul. I'd like to say I felt sorry for him, but I have never beat the man. Best mate, one of my best mates and all that. But he really did. He had a really bad draw, and by this point, I'd chip damaged away enough that there wasn't much he could do. So he managed to kill the Void Weaver that I dropped in his deployment zone during that turn, and that was about all he did. He drew Area Denial, which he couldn't get, and he drew a Tempting Target, which obviously I'm going to pick an objective that I know the Knights are not going to be able to get to. So unfortunately, he failed to score any secondary on at the bottom of his turn 5. So by the end of his turn 5, he'd maxed out his primary and 21 out of 40 on his secondaries. So into my turn 5, at the end of his movement, at the end of his fight phase, or what would have been his fight phase in his turn 5, I lifted my Death Jester off the board using the exit the stage stratagem again. And then I drew Overwhelming Force and Tempting Target. The only thing he got in his army that was on an objective was his Navigator, which was on his home objective. He was very, very clever with his Tempting Target, because he chose the objective where I had my Solitaire, and my Solitaire could have easily got to kill the Navigator, but I had to have given up that objective, and I couldn't have got anything else onto it. So what I did, having lifted the Death Jester, is again I brought the Death Jester down in exactly the same place I brought the Star Weaver, the Void Weaver down the turn before, and the Death Jester, 3 shots. I think there was 2 6s in the 3 dice. So there's another 6 shots in. The poor Navigator didn't stand a chance. And then I got the Tempting Target because the Solitaire was already there. So I only scored 37 out of 50 on my primary and 33 out of 40 on my secondary. So the game was an incredibly good game. At any point it could have gone. It could have gone either way. If I had managed the assassination turn 1, or if I had completed a second cleanse instead of just cleansing one objective, I think the game would have been mine. As it was, I lost it 80 to 81. I had some phenomenal dice rolls. At one point, I had 4 armor saves to make, and they were quite crucial armor saves. They were on warp spiders. I had 4 5+ invulnerable armor saves to make, and I rolled 4 5s. It was incredible just how well my armor saves were doing for me, and unfortunately for Paul, he wasn't saving so well at all. I think he's having played Knights before the Codex drop, and this being the first time I've played them since the Codex drop, I will say, with my hand on my heart, now they've lost their feel no pains, they feel beatable. Honestly, it didn't feel like he was running away with the game. It didn't feel like I was losing the game. Yes, I was losing a lot of units, but that's what my Harlequins are there for. That's what my troops are there for. They go out, they tie stuff up, they chip damage, they soften things up, so the big guns in the background can then go, you can go away, you can go away, you can go away. It was a really, really good game, really, really fun game. And I realised a couple of days out, day or so afterwards, that is only the 3rd time that me and Paul have played each other since last November. Paul, we need to do something about this. We need to deal with this. So that was how the game went. It was a really good game, really good game. You know, it always is fun playing against Paul. Just don't do it often enough. And I was really pleased with how this new list went. So I've made a few changes to the list. I can't remember if I went through them in the last video. But what I'm running now is my Death Jester is my Warlord. I have a Solitaire, I have a Shadow Seer, I have 3 Troop Masters. That's my characters. I then have a unit of Guardian Storm. They're there for the sticky objectives in the middle, you know, just to, you know, contest that one in the middle, put enough out to take an objective. You know, they get shot off the objective, I put more out, you know, and if there's nothing on the objective to when they get shot off it, because it's sticky, it stays mine. Then I've got 4 units of troops. 3 of those have got the 2 fusion guns, the 2 neural disruptors, the power sword. They've got 2 special weapons and 2 blades in each unit. Troop masters all have fusion pistols. So those 3 units all go with the troop masters, and then I've got 1/4 unit which has a power sword and just 4 special weapons. No fusion guns, no neural disruptors, just 4 special weapons and a power sword. And those ones go with my Shadow Seer, who has the Mistweave enhancement, and he infiltrates up the board with them. Then I've got 2 fire prisms. People have said to me, why fire prisms over fire dragons? In my opinion, and I will emphasize this is my opinion, this is what I have found from playing them, fire dragons in Ghosts of the Webway, because they don't have the Skyborn Sanctuary, so they can pay a CP and get back in a Wave Serpent, and they can't use the Harlequin Starweavers. I find that the fire dragons are very much a one and done unit. They'll get out of the Wave Serpent because they have to have a Wave Serpent, because fire dragons need a delivery system. They're such short range models, they need a delivery system. Yes, the rerolls against tanks and monsters are great. You know, they're big, strong, tough guns. But I do find, especially in the Ghosts of the Webway detachment, that they are a one and done. They get out of the Wave Serpent, they delete something, you know, and they might massively over delete it. But then, because I can't get them back into the transport, you know, like I could using Skyborn Sanctuary, they are very, very vulnerable to then being deleted themselves. So the fire prisms do everything from a lot further away, from 6, you know, they can do you from 60 inches away. You know, they can do you 12 damage. You know, you got your 2 shots, you re-roll 1 hit, you re-roll 1 wound. You know, they can do 12 damage a turn. You know, there's not an awful lot that gets up from that when it does hit you. They're probably not as efficient points wise, but for me, in my army and the way I play, they are the better choice. Then I've got 2 Void Weavers, which I have to say I had taken out of the army a while back. However, on discussion with one of our esteemed friends, Toby, he persuaded me to put them back in. The reason I'd taken them out was because I had Haywires on them, and a lot of the meta I find myself playing against, yes, you meet knights, you know, you do meet some tank armies, but there's a lot of Tyranids, there's a lot of demons, you know, so there's a lot of monsters, which the Haywires don't get any benefit for. So he persuaded me to go with the baby prism cannons, which at strength 12. And our thinking behind it was, I say ours, his thinking behind it was, a fire prism at strength 18, a knight is now toughness 11, so it's 3s to wound. A void weaver mini prism cannon, baby prism cannon, is strength 12 against a knight that's toughness 11. It's still 3s to wound. Yeah, so so against big stuff like that, you're only looking at 3s to wound. But with the Haywires, you're looking at 4+ to wound, because it's 4+ anti-infantry, anti-vehicle. Yeah, yes, they're devastating wounds. Yeah, but you'll be surprised if you need a 3, or if you need a 4, you'll be surprised how many times you only roll 3. Yeah, so the thinking was 3-ups over 4-ups, probably the better choice. Then I've got 3 Star Weavers for transport. They are exceptionally robust for what they are. You know, they're only T6. They're only 6 wounds, like the Star Weavers. You know, not the Star Weavers, like the Void Weavers. Sorry, but the Void Weavers do have the stealth with it, which helps as well. But each of the Star Weavers also has 2 Shuriken cannons, and because of the Shuriken cannons being lethal hits, they trade up quite considerably. You know, the chip damage they can do off knights, off Layman Russes, off monsters, just the little chip damage, just the little 2 damage here and there, makes a huge difference across the army. Yeah, and then obviously, you know, they'll delete, you know, between all the Shuriken cannons that are in the army, they will delete Space Marines, you know, quite easily. So what else have I got? I've then got 5 Warp Spiders. They are there solely because of their speed. They can get across the battle. They're not there to kill anything. In fact, now they've lost their devastating wounds when the Codex dropped, they don't kill much. But they get across the battlefield. They're one of the fastest units in the game. 24-inch move. All right, I've got to take hazardous tests, you know. But you know, you've got a 1 in 6 chance of rolling a 1. So you know, they get on the battlefield where you need them to be. You know, you start them in the middle. You know, from the middle of the battlefield, both objectives are within 24 inches. If you're feeling suicidal and you want to get into your opponent's deployment zone turn 1, you know, that's within 24 inches. You know, honestly, they are only there for the speed, and once they get where you need them, they'll block something up, they'll tie something up. You know, just charge them in for the sake of it. You know, because whilst a monster or a knight is in combat with them, it's not moving. You know, and then I've got 2 Skyweaver bikes. Honestly, they're in the army to do very, very similar. They do have the Haywire cannons, so they can do chip damage, devastating wounds against vehicles. They're not particularly helpful against a monster-based army in that respect, but they do hit quite hard in close combat. I mean, you get, I believe it's 4 attacks each from them, and they're strength 6, AP 2 damage a pop with the glaives. So you know, they are reasonably effective in combat, but they're not there for that. They're there to slow stuff down. They're there to tie stuff up. and score the odd secondary. And then I've also, the only other thing I've got is I've got a single Warlock Skyrunner. The Warlock Skyrunner himself, he's there to help with the secondaries. While the Solitaire is off doing secondaries, he's doing secondaries. The Death Jester's doing secondaries. Recover assets. The Solitaire can shoot off into the opponent's deployment zone. He can recover assets there. I've got the Warlock Skyrunner in the midboard. He's doing the secondary there, and the Death Jester's doing it in mine. Maxed it out. So that is the plan with the army. Anyway, doesn't always work that way. Honestly, doesn't always work that way. But I'll do more videos on this on my army and how it plays and how I use it after this weekend's tournament review, and I'll do a review as well about how I feel about my first year in tournaments, and what I think I've learned, and if it gives new players in the game any sort of encouragement at all, then that was absolutely fantastic. And there aren't many of us that are Harlequin focused. There's a few. You've got Craftworld Eldar, who is excellent content. You've got Proxy Hammer, who's excellent content. But they are both Craftworld orientated most of the time. The only other guy I've managed to find on YouTube that is Harlequin focused is Exile Wargaming. I've learned a lot this year from watching his videos. So shout out to Exile. Really enjoy your content, and hope to see some more of it soon. Anyway, I'm done waffling now. So wish me luck for this weekend. I don't know who my first match is against yet, but I do know that although there were 40 tickets available, at the last time I checked there was only 30 that had been sold, and there's only, other than the West Norfolk Rollers, the other two West Norfolk Rollers that are going, Paul and Jay, and obviously myself, there are only 2 other names on the whole of the roster that I recognise, which is unusual because usually it's the same reprobates, for want of a better word, all the time. So it is an interesting lineup, and it would be really interesting to see and to meet some new faces, and to play some games against some new faces. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you all for listening. I hope you got this far. Thank you very much if you did. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and do all the other shizzle underneath. And I will see you again probably next week after the tournament. I'll put a video out, just as a final review of how that went. And in the meantime, may the dice forever roll in your favour. Good night, everybody.